Good day, everyone. This is Captain Shadow speaking. Welcome to our virtual flight, filled with stories, history, and adventure. Today, we're flying from Grand Case to the iconic St. Martin. Buckle up, because this trip promises breathtaking views and thrilling tales. Let me ask you something. Have you ever wondered what flying was like in the 1930s? Imagine stepping aboard a plane that shaped aviation history. That's exactly what we're doing today. Our aircraft is no ordinary one. We're flying in the legendary Junkers Ru-52. Known as the Flying Tank, it was the epitome of reliability and innovation in its time. With its 3 engines roaring through the skies, it was designed to tackle even the toughest conditions. It's a plane that looks retro, but was once cutting edge. In the 1930s, it carried passengers, cargo, and mail across continents. It's a true icon of early aviation, with a design as unique as its story. So let's dive into its world together. Our journey begins at Grand Case, a picturesque airport on the beautiful island of St. Martin. This airfield is surrounded by mountains and the sea, creating one of the most stunning settings for any flight. The views here are breathtaking. A mix of blue skies, green hills, and golden beaches. Grand Case may be small, but it's full of character. Its runway is short, requiring precision and skill to navigate. Every takeoff and landing here feels like a performance. Today, we're part of that magic. St. Martin is known for its charm and its aviation allure. Pilots, travelers, and plane enthusiasts all love this island for its unique airports. We're lucky to experience it today. Before we take off, let me tell you what's in store. Today, we're not just talking about the beauty of flying. We're diving into stories of courage, innovation, and survival. Our journey will explore the highs and lows of aviation history. We'll revisit the legend of the Junkers Ru-52. This aircraft has seen triumphs, but it has also faced moments of tragedy. Today, we'll uncover 2 unforgettable events that changed aviation forever. First, we'll talk about a crash in Switzerland during a snowstorm in 1942. A tale of harsh conditions, human error, and lessons learned. Then we'll dive into a 1950 disaster in the Andes Mountains. It's a story of ambition, miscalculation, and the unforgiving power of nature. These are not just stories about planes. They're stories about people, resilience, and the quest for safety in the skies. Are you ready to join me in uncovering them? Let's take off. Check your seatbelts and settle in. Imagine yourself in a seat on the Junkers Ru-52. Picture its metal frame, its vintage feel, its roaring engines. Let yourself be transported to a different era of flying. This isn't just about facts or figures. It's about feeling the thrill of aviation history. It's about stepping into the shoes of those who came before us. So, prepare for an unforgettable experience. Our journey today is more than just a flight. It's a chance to see the world through the eyes of early aviators, to feel their triumphs, their fears, and their legacy. Together, we'll honor their stories and learn from their challenges. If you're enjoying this so far, give this live a like. Share it with anyone who loves aviation or thrilling stories. Your support keeps this journey going and helps us explore more incredible flights. So, are you ready to dive into aviation history? Are you prepared to feel the highs and lows of these legendary flights? Then let's take off into the skies. Welcome aboard, and thank you for flying with Captain Shadow. It was the winter of 1942, and the world was at war. High above the Swiss Alps, a Junkers Ru-52 embarked on what seemed like a routine flight. On board were tourists enjoying a rare escape and mail destined to cross the mountains. The skies were clear, and the mountains below stretched out like a white carpet for the passengers. It was a sight to behold, a reminder of nature's beauty amid the chaos of war. The plane was a marvel of its time, designed to withstand challenging conditions. The crew trusted it implicitly. Flying was still a luxury, a privilege not many could afford. But as the saying goes, nature has no master. What began as a serene flight would soon turn into a desperate struggle against the elements. Imagine you're on board that plane, outside. The world is peaceful, silent, and covered in snow. Inside, the engines hum a steady rhythm, a sound that feels like a lullaby. You glance out the window, marveling at the majesty of the Alps. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, the mood begins to change. Do you notice it right away, or do you tell yourself it's just a passing moment? Nothing to worry about. It started with a single snowflake, then another and another. Before long, the windows were streaked with frost. The pristine blue sky replaced by a swirling white abyss. Snow fell heavier, a curtain that swallowed the landscape below. Visibility plummeted, leaving the pilots staring into a void. The cockpit, once filled with confident chatter, grew silent. The crew exchanged glances, their expressions betraying growing concern. They checked their instruments, adjusted their course, and hoped the storm would pass. But the storm didn't pass. It strengthened, like a heavy fog rolling over a city. The snowstorm engulfed the plane entirely. Then came the sound. A faint creak, then a groan, like an old ship straining against icy waters. It was subtle at first, almost easy to dismiss, but it grew louder, more insistent. The pilots knew what it meant. Ice was forming on the wings. The weight of it threatened the plane's delicate balance, pulling it closer to disaster with every second. The controls became sluggish, resisting the pilots' efforts. It was as if the plane itself was fighting back, refusing to obey. The instruments flickered, and the altimeter danced erratically. They were losing their grip on the situation, their confidence replaced by a cold, creeping dread. Imagine trying to drive a car on a sheet of ice, and control slips through your fingers. That's what it felt like for the pilots. But at thousands of feet in the air, there was no stopping, no pulling over, no calling for help. They were alone, caught between the storm and the mountains below. Some passengers clutched their armrests. Others whispered prayers. Fear spread like wildfire, silent but palpable. The Alps, which had looked so majestic from above, now loomed as a deadly threat. Peaks jutted into the clouds, unseen but dangerously close. The pilots scanned their instruments, desperately searching for a way out. But with no visibility and ice threatening to overwhelm the plane, their options were shrinking by the second. This was no longer a routine flight. It was a race against time, a battle between man and nature, machine and storm. Could the Junkers Ru-52 hold on, or would the mountains claim another victim? The passengers didn't know the answer. The pilots weren't sure either. And the storm showed no mercy. The storm showed no signs of letting up. The plane, now heavy with ice, struggled to stay airborne. The once reliable engines roared in protest, their power dwindling as the weight on the wings increased. The controls were no longer responsive. Every adjustment the pilots made felt like steering against an invisible force. Altitude dropped rapidly, and with no clear view of the terrain, they were flying blind. The turbulence hit like a hammer. The plane shook violently, jolting passengers out of their seats. Overhead compartments burst open, and luggage spilled into the aisle. It felt like being inside a shaken snow globe, with no way to predict where or when the next blow would come. The crew clung to their seats, their faces etched with grim determination. They were fighting not just for the plane, but for the lives of everyone on board. In the cabin, fear was now palpable. People gripped their armrests, their knuckles white with tension. Some screamed, others sat in stunned silence. A child cried out for their mother, the sound piercing through the chaos. One passenger attempted to console their seatmate, but their voice was drowned out by the deafening roar of the engines and the howling wind outside. The captain shouted over the noise, ordering a descent. It was their only chance to try and find a clearing in the storm, a break in the mountains. But descending through an alpine snowstorm was a gamble, and time was running out. As the pilots adjusted the throttle, the plane lurched forward, dropping faster than intended. The passengers felt the goop-trenching pull of gravity, like a roller coaster plunging into the abyss. Then came the sound no one wanted to hear. Deafening crack. One of the wings clipped an unseen peak, sending the plane spiraling. The force was unimaginable, as if the very air had turned against them. Loose objects became projectiles, and the cabin tilted at a terrifying angle. The pilots fought to stabilize the aircraft, their hands moving frantically over the controls. But the damage was done. The plane was no longer flying. It was falling. The final moments were a blur. A scream, a jolt, and then silence. The Junker's Ru-52 slammed into a rocky slope, its body crumpling like paper against the unforgiving terrain. Flames erupted from the engines, a stark contrast to the icy whiteness surrounding the wreckage. Inside, the once cozy cabin was now a twisted cage of metal and shattered glass. 12 lives were lost instantly. The once vibrant passengers, full of excitement and curiosity, were now silent victims of nature's wrath. The crash site, hidden deep within the snowy Alps, became a frozen graveyard. It was a tragic end to what began as a routine flight. The disaster in the Swiss Alps served as a sobering reminder of the dangers of flying in extreme conditions. It highlighted the critical need for better weather forecasting and more cautious flight planning. Pilots learned to respect the power of nature and to prioritize safety over schedules. From that day forward, aviation authorities began implementing stricter guidelines for flying in mountainous regions. Weather analysis became more sophisticated, and flight crews received better training to handle sudden storms. Though the tragedy claimed 12 lives, its lessons saved countless others in the years to come. The crash was a turning point, a stark warning that no aircraft, no matter how advanced, is invincible against the elements. It remains a haunting chapter in aviation history, a story of courage, failure, and the relentless quest for safer skies. The Alps tragedy was a grim reminder of nature's power, but it wasn't the last time mountains would challenge the limits of aviation. Just 8 years later, another plane found itself at the mercy of towering peaks. This time, it wasn't a snowstorm, but a fatal miscalculation that sealed its fate. Imagine flying over the Andes Mountains, where the peaks seem to reach up and touch the clouds. The air is thin, the terrain unforgiving, and every decision made in the cockpit carries immense weight. What happens when a pilot makes the wrong call? When ambition meets the unyielding force of nature? This is the story of the 1950 crash in the Andes, a tale of human error, overconfidence, and the harsh lessons learned from flying in one of the world's most dangerous regions. Before we dive into this next chapter, let me take a moment to thank you for joining me on this journey. If you're enjoying these stories and want to keep this channel flying high, your support means the world. Leave a like, share this live with others, or consider following the channel to stay updated on future flights. Every bit of support helps us explore more incredible tales from aviation history. Now, fasten your seatbelts as we climb into the Andes and uncover what went wrong in 1950. Let's continue our journey. A few years after the tragic crash in the Alps, aviation faced another challenge. This time, the scene shifted to South America and the unforgiving Andes Mountains. The year was 1950, and the flight was meant to be routine. The aircraft, an advanced model for its time, carried passengers eager to reach their destination. The day began with clear skies and calm winds, a perfect day for flying. The pilots, seasoned professionals, were confident. Their route took them through one of the most dramatic landscapes in the world. Beneath them lay the Andes, a range of towering peaks that stretched endlessly into the horizon. Imagine looking out the window and seeing mountains so high they seem to pierce the clouds. The sheer scale of the Andes is humbling, a stark reminder of nature's power. For the passengers, the view was breathtaking. They had no idea the same peaks that inspired awe would soon become their greatest enemy. As the plane cruised at altitude, everything seemed normal. The engines hummed steadily, and the cabin was filled with the quiet murmur of conversation. For the pilots, the task was simple: navigate over the mountains and reach their destination. But in aviation, even a small mistake can have catastrophic consequences. The crew made a decision, one they believed would save time. They calculated their altitude, checked their instruments, and chose to fly over a section of the Andes they thought was safe. It was a gamble, one based on incomplete information and overconfidence. Have you ever trusted a shortcut, only to realize too late that it was a mistake? That's what happened here. The pilots believed their knowledge and experience would carry them through. But the Andes are not forgiving, and the smallest error can spell disaster. As the plane approached the mountains, the once clear skies began to change. Clouds gathered over the peaks, creating a dense layer of mist that obscured the view. The passengers noticed a shift. First light turbulence rocked the cabin, and the horizon disappeared into a veil of gray. The pilots reassured the crew and passengers that everything was fine. They adjusted their heading, confident they were above the highest peaks, but they couldn't see the mountains ahead, hidden by the thick clouds. Their calculations were off by just a few hundred feet of fatal margin in this unforgiving terrain. The first real sign of trouble came with a sudden downdraft. The plane jolted violently, sending a ripple of gasps through the cabin. The pilots gripped the controls, trying to steady the aircraft, but the turbulence intensified. The overhead lights flickered, and the comforting hum of the engines is replaced by a strained, uneven roar. Then came the sound. A deep, ominous rumble echoed through the cabin, followed by a metallic groan. It was the sound of the plane struggling against the elements, a sound no passenger wants to hear. The turbulence grew worse, slamming the plane from side to side. Loose items fell from overhead compartments, and passengers clung to their seats. The crew knew they were in serious trouble. They scanned their instruments, searching for a way out, but the situation was spiraling out of control. The mountains were too close, the turbulence too severe, and the aircraft too heavy to climb fast enough. One of the pilots looked out the window and caught a glimpse of the mountains. They were much closer than he had expected, their jagged peaks looming like silent sentinels. He shouted a warning, but it was too late. The plane was heading straight into the side of the Andes. The passengers felt a sharp drop, followed by a deafening crack as the plane struck an unseen peak. The impact was brutal, throwing the cabin into chaos. Seats were torn from their mounts, and the force knocked the breath out of everyone on board. For a brief moment, the world was nothing but noise and violence. Then, silence. The plane had come to rest, its body broken and scattered across the mountainside. The passengers who survived the initial impact were left stranded in one of the most hostile environments on Earth, facing an uncertain fate. The plane slammed into the mountainside with unimaginable force. The impact tore the aircraft apart, scattering debris across the rugged terrain. Inside, the cabin became a scene of utter devastation. Seats were ripped from their bolts, and loose objects turned into deadly projectiles. Passengers who had moments earlier been enjoying their journey were now fighting for their lives. The sound of the crash echoed across the peaks, a thunderous roar followed by an eerie silence. For those who survived the initial impact, the nightmare had only just begun. The frigid air of the Andes swept through the shattered fuselage, chilling survivors to the bone. Many were injured, disoriented, or in shock, their cries for help drowned by the howling wind. The pilots had no chance to correct their course. In the final moments before the crash, they had done everything they could to pull up, but the aircraft was too heavy and too low. The engines, pushed to their limits, failed to deliver the power needed to escape the deadly grip of the mountains. For the survivors, the reality of their situation began to sink in. They were stranded in one of the most remote and hostile environments on Earth. The jagged peaks of the Andes surrounded them on all sides, a cold and indifferent witness to the tragedy. Rescue seemed impossible, and the thought of survival felt like a distant dream. The scene was haunting, a mangled aircraft resting on a snow-covered slope, with debris and personal belongings scattered around it. Flames from the broken engines illuminated the wreckage, casting flickering shadows over the mountain. The once luxurious cabin, a sanctuary in the skies, was now a ruin, a testament to the sheer power of the Andes. For 12 passengers and crew, there was no chance of survival. Their lives were taken instantly by the impact, a stark reminder of the unforgiving nature of flying through such treacherous terrain. The survivors, however, were left with a harrowing question. How would they endure the days ahead in the frozen wilderness? The Andes crash of 1950 highlighted the devastating consequences of overconfidence and miscalculation. It was a sobering lesson for aviation, showing that even the most experienced pilots are not immune to errors. The decision to take a shortcut over the mountains, combined with a lack of accurate topographical data, proved fatal. In the aftermath, aviation authorities around the world began to emphasize better training for mountain flying and stricter route planning. The tragedy spurred advancements in navigation technology, ensuring pilots had more accurate information about the terrain below. Though the crash was a heartbreaking loss, Its legacy was one of progress. It underscored the importance of respecting nature's power and prioritizing safety above all else. The lessons learned from the Andes continue to influence aviation today, saving countless lives and ensuring that such a mistake is never repeated.